in several Yiddish programs and in touch with probably government regarding this. I don't know. So, but he's very, very active in Yiddish life, and he's traveling around, and he'll tell you about this himself. Have fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And the truth is that actually my colleague, I'm not here, but he came to pick me up in Crown Heights, and I really thought, he's always so including, right? Like I've never met this man. And he's like, where are you? I was like, I don't know. I've never really been to New York. Maybe I have been to New York. I'm like, not really. I'm in Crown Heights somewhere at a friend's house. He's like, all right, I'll come pick you up and we'll go to Yiddishland. And that's sort of like how it happened. So I'm really grateful to be here. I think I talked a little bit about Sweden then too. So although you might, well, you know everything about my life anyways. But I will talk a little bit about Yiddish in Sweden. There's a lot to say, and like my angle at this is that I work with it in different ways. As I said, my name is Tomas. I'm hired. I work as a librarian, so that's sort of my Kuckwinkel from this talk. That like I'll talk a little bit about things that has to do with education and literature. Those are like my two main. Sie sind meine. You know how hard it is when you switch, right? You get back and forth. But those are like my two interests. So hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about Sweden during this talk. I'm free to, if you get bored, you can walk out. You can always get in touch afterwards too if there's any additional questions or if there's something that comes to mind. Or for that matter, if you want to be put in Verbindung with anybody. Because as Kolja said, it's not, to be in touch with the government in Sweden isn't such a, we're a small country and it's not, we're bigger than Iceland, but it's always like with the Scandinavian countries, like to know somebody that has, we all know each other more or less, a little bit here and there. But to give you a little bit of context, so Sweden isn't really, like maybe the country that people think of when they hear Yiddish. And I know this to be true because not only have I been here now for the second time, but also my mom always says that I'm, not speaking loud enough or mumbling or whatever. So let me know if that happens, okay? And I'll try to speak clear.
So far, so good. It's really
So far, so good. Thank you. But I don't know. Like I've been an immigrant to Canada, and I've always noticed that like people sort of think that, oh, Yiddish in Europe, then you think, Poland or Lithuania or maybe, maybe France, if you know about Medem or whatever. So I don't think that if I'd said like, oh, I speak Yiddish, I'm from Lithuania, then nobody would really probably, raise their eyebrow. But when you say you're from Sweden, everyone's like, Sweden? What has that got to do with Yiddish? And the truth is that there's a whole lot happening with Yiddish in Sweden. I suppose if you have Poland, that doesn't, and we all know why, have so many Yiddish speakers left. Not only because of the Kurban, but also after the pogroms, everything that happened in 1968. But that's also one of the reasons why some of those Polish people that left in 68 actually came to Sweden and like added to our Yiddish-speaking Kahila. Sweden isn't maybe known for so many things. If you go abroad, people are always like, oh, Swiss, yeah, cheese, army knives, watches. Even as somebody who sometimes, corresponds with the Canadian government, the government of, like the provincial government of Quebec, they always send my, cards and everything to Swiss. And I call it, like, Swiss, Suède, c'est pas le même pays. It's not the same country, but we're always like confused with Switzerland. But the truth is we're way up there in the north. So, a dark and kind of cold place that no one really wants to go. But there's also like people that are warm, there's, it's gemischt. And the people that live in the north and in the United States knows that, sometimes the weather is cold, but, it can be warm inside and with people, So here's Europe, right? And just to give, like, people probably know this, but just to give some of those that don't, like, here's France and Germany, and Poland, Lithuania, and up here it is. So we're right up in the north, and like the northern parts are actually north of the Arctic Circle, hence the land of the midnight sun. Yeah, so that was a little bit of context. This is actually from the Wikia page, the wiki page And if you look up Sweden, you can see certain things, right? Such as the flag over here and the coat of arms. It's still a monarchy, so there's a king and a queen, which the Germans love because they just love like royal gossip and news. But if you scroll down a little bit, you'll notice that, okay, the capital and the largest city is Stockholm over here. Well, there's a picture even coming up. It looks snowy. And official language is Swedish, but if you scroll down, now here's where it gets interesting. National minority languages, Sami, Finnish, Meänkieli, Romani, and Yiddish. Now, so that's why, there is a whole lot to do with Yiddish in Sweden, as I said. That comes as a surprise to many people. I'll tell you a little bit about how that happened, the Kitzer, and then afterwards, we'll see a little bit about what that meant, what entailed that decision to recognize it as a national minority language. Okay, so first and foremost, the national minority languages are also connected to national minorities that are recognized. So, as for Sami, some of you probably know, Sami people are indigenous people that live in the northern parts of Sweden, over here, and Norway, Finland, and all the way into Russia. There's a language connected called Sami that has several different dialects that are very different from each other. Finland, which is over here, is, you may think, sometimes we get so stuck with languages, especially in Europe. I think maybe you're better at that over here. But we often think of oh, Lithuania, that's where people speak Lithuanian. Oh, Poland, there's Polish. Oh, Sweden, there's Swedish. But Finnish has been spoken in this region for a long time, and also in Sweden. Again, being Europe, Finland was Sweden at a time, and then came Russia, and then came Finland, and so nazoivajte. But it is a national minority. There are Swedish Finns, and the language that is being recognized is Finnish. There's also a group in the northern region called Tornedalingar, and the language Meänkieli, that's also the recognized language, is their language. Romani is I'm sure many of you know, but just to clear it out, I think there's 4 different dialects or 5 recognized in Sweden officially, but it's the language of Roma people. In Yiddish literature, it's sometimes referred to as Zigeuner or Zigan, but to give people a bit more derecheret. In Europe, we usually don't use words as Zigeuner or Gypsy. We use the word Roma to show respect. And so the Roma languages are also recognized. What makes it a little bit different with these 4 languages is that they've all sort of been treated badly historically. That in the school system, people have been told not to use Finnish, not to speak Romani, and the Sami people had to go to school, not totally unlike Canada, but also a bit different. I'm sure you know of the terrible atrocities that happened with the First Nations residential schools. It's somewhat different, but it's a little bit reminiscent as well. And I think to Sweden, it's a little bit new trying to deal with that past. Not always so good, I'd say in Europe, but in Sweden for sure, to look at ourselves with a bit of criticism. But Yiddish is also a recognized minority language. It hasn't been punished as such. But what's true for all of these languages, and was one of the factors that made them being recognized to begin with, was that the minority wanted to have the language recognized, and that it came for the national minority themselves, but also that the language itself should have been documented in the country for at least 100, maybe even 100-something years. So they all have been in Sweden, living in Sweden for a long time, these languages. And that's important to know because many people, especially in the Jewish community, unfortunately, I'd say, but have a little bit of, I can understand it to some extent too. Why isn't Hebrew the official national minority language? because there's more Hebrew speakers, and like modern Hebrew has a different like access to Israel or other Jewish things in a way, but it's actually because the amount of time that the language has existed in Sweden, for sure. But it's important to know that, because as Ron and I know, sometimes people get a little bit what should we say? A little bit what? Combative about the status of Yiddish versus Hebrew. Then again, as a minority language, I think it makes sense to try and work extra hard for a language that may have a harder time surviving in a context. The decision itself took a little time to. It was like a long process, and it was combined with the European Union has a law that Sweden signed, and then had to recognize and had to acknowledge these national minorities and national minority languages. So several people were involved. It didn't happen just on its own. There are some people that were very active in the process and working very hard for it to happen. And I'm going to show you a little clip, just a little short one. It's a few minutes, and it's also the only one that I have that's a little bit longer. I think it's maybe 4 minutes. It's in Yiddish, but we can look at it and then I can say short what it is that she says. I'm sure that most of you will understand it given the context that I just gave you, and otherwise yeah.
Should we turn the lights off and back?
I don't know. Is it hard to see with is there a reflection or is it okay?
Can't turn them off. It's better.
Okay.
No, turn them on.
Thanks.
Okay, David.
Okay, where are we? Here we go. Okay. Nothing is happening. Oh, wow. Maybe I'll just refresh the page.
Or just give it a sec.
Oh. Okay, let me just see where she gets this. Okay, now there's a little bit of problem with the sound here. I don't actually know. Is call yes or no?
I think you're okay now, it's like the volume's at 64.
It's just the sound that's been cut off. Oh, hi. Can you look wonderful?
Wait, is it playing from your computer?
It's playing from my computer, and it worked when we met here a few hours ago. But then, we had lunch, and there was singing, and all kinds of stuff. Oh yeah, there's that. Cheers.
Als kleine,
Wow. Wow. That's
It's
good.
good and loud. Can you turn it down a
Yeah,
bit?
When
sure.
you're too good turning it up, this is in here.
Oh, yeah.
hat es nicht gezogen von mir, weil ich ziehe jetzt. Die Regierung hat anerkannt, dass ich kann dort sein in dem Komitee und ich kann schützen und arbeiten für Jiddisch. Und heim ist du der Tag. Du ist gekommen der Tag, wenn ich mein Spruch hat mich schon nicht gesehen, 3 Jahre mehr zwischen den verschiedenen Sitzungen und mit der Arbeit. Und jeder auf der Nacht hat das Telefon geklingelt und alles wegen machen Jiddisch eine Sprache zwischen anderen kleineren Sprachen. Aber keiner hat du nicht gewollt, halten eine Hand und stimmen für Jiddisch. Die Tränen gießen sich. Ich weiß nicht, was vor ihr zu sagen. Ich stelle mich auf, ich kicke mich herum. Ich sage zu den Politikern und zu den Menschen neben mir: 25.000 Jiden. du nicht gewiat keine Stimme. Ens hat man sich alle verlost auf euch. Ens hat man geglaubt, als eng unterstützen Jiddisch. In de Tränen kommen unasof. Ich kipp auf den Vorsitzer nicht so. Hör uns. Meine Tränen sollen sein nicht sterben, dein Schluff. Jiddische Tränen kein wohl nicht gehabt, kein heuchen Preis. Ich nehm mein Tecken, meine Papieren, ich läuf heraus vom Stieb. Die Menschen hab ich kein mehr im Leben nicht gesehen. Ich komme raus, stehen dort Kameras und Journalisten und eine Sachmenschen, jeder eine Wert. Was wird du bestimmen? Und ich komme mit meinen Tränen. Und für ein Sisu-Radio kommt da raus als Journalist und fragt, was ist geschehen? Was hat sich da ausgespielt? Und ich weiß nicht, was ich haben geantwortet. Bis einen hartigen Tag gedenke ich nicht, was ich habe gesagt. Ich komme zurück heim. Es ist Freitag Nachmittag. Und bei uns in der Stieb ist Schabbos. Ich beruhige mich. Ich habe zu klären, was tut man jetzt? Viele Sprachen hat man gestützt mit einem Ja. Aber für Jiddisch ist nicht gewesen, Emetze soll stützen. Ich erzähle jeder ein, was will hören. Und sof verstimme ich mich. Ich habe abzuschreiben. Du geht ein Brief. Teile Premierminister Göran Persson. Was die Deutschen haben nicht gemacht, für jüdischen Jiden. Was hatten sich nicht ausgespielt mit den Jiden und Jiddisch in der Sowjetunion oder in Polen oder in Ungarn. Das wird man jetzt machen, euch für Jiddisch. In Schweden. Ihr werdet machen eine Holocaust-Konferenz in 2 Jahren. Timira Teubo, macht nicht fertig den Arbeit zu vermecken Jiddisch in der Welt. Es geht 2 Jahre. Es ist gekommen der Tag, wenn die Regierung geht stimmen für die Sprachen. In der Proposition ist Jiddisch nicht reingeschrieben. Aber wenn man leint, und ich sitze zusammen mit meinem Mann und man hört von der Radio, leint man aus. Die schwedische Regierung wird unterschreiben dem europäischen Sprachgesetz für Finnisch, Same, Meänkieli, Romani in Jiddisch. Und der Premierminister hat sicher das ausgeführt.
Okay, that was a few minutes. As you can tell, this is like a lady that's been working very hard for Yiddish. And those of you who understood, hopefully really feel her passion, her deep, profound feelings for this and her work for the language. Can you keep it a little, yeah, we can maybe turn it down later because I'm going to show a few other clips. But you'll be the light engineer and then we'll do it.
I got you.
Okay, so what she said basically was that in the beginning she was at this meeting, there was a vote, and this meeting was like, I think it was in 1998 or 1999. She'd been working very hard to have Yiddish recognized as a minority language. And at this meeting there's a vote, okay? And at the vote, people vote yes to the other 4 minority languages that I mentioned earlier, but no for Yiddish. And it just breaks her heart. So she goes out, the tears are gissen on the Bechtle. And a journalist comes out and asks her, like, how did it go? And she's just like, she blacks out. She doesn't remember what happened. And after that, she sits down in her despair and decides to write a letter to the prime minister at the time. His name was Yaron Pasha. And basically what she says is like, or before she does that, she says, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go through everything she said because it's so great. At the meeting where people voted no to Yiddish, she started crying. She says, don't you like worry about my tears. Like the tears of the Yiddish Quere, what nicht gehabt kein hohen Preis. I've never had, like, it was never valued very much or treasured, you know. So my Yiddish tears aren't anyways worth so much. So like, don't let it ruin your sleep at night. You know? And then she goes up. She goes home and writes to the prime minister, and she says, please, you know, don't finish the work that Hitler and Soviet was doing on the Jews and on Yiddish. Please, you know, think this over again. Make sure that there's a future for Yiddish in Sweden. And then she reads in the paper together with her husband, and all of a sudden, even though it wasn't supposed to be on the regime, it anyways showed up, and it was recognized. So the prime minister somehow like listened to this lady's words and had it done. So she's sort of the grand dame of Yiddish in Sweden. Some of you here know her or have met her. But it's important to know, I think, I sometimes, myself, having benefited so much from like all the fun and everything that happens with Yiddish in Sweden, that it just didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen, you know, by sich allein. It happened after years of work from people like her and others. Okay, so what does this mean? Like this decision, so it was recognized, and Sweden is a country with, as she said, 25,000 Jews around. Nobody really knows, you know, there's no way of counting people, and it's actually illegal to try and register, like, how many Roma people are there or whatever, especially when it comes to national minorities, like, you know, it's paws off for government counting like that. But roughly, that's what people estimated at, and around 3,000 people that somehow speaks Yiddish. Now, mind you, that may not be that people speak Yiddish like many people here do, but that maybe you have a relationship to Yiddish, that like you might know a word or two, or you know, it might have been your parents' language, and you have a profound, like, deep connection to it, but don't really speak it that well. But around 3,000, I'd say that like there's at least a couple of hundred that are really active, that are doing all these things that I'll show you in a little bit. But I think one of the reasons why the decision was like itself took some time to go through, and that there was a bit of like hesitation, is maybe also because what happened then was that the government also decided, like they signed this law with the European Union, but they also took on themselves to support Yiddish, you know, in the future as well, and that comes to a cost. And I think that cost has been very beneficial in the case of Yiddish. That a lot of things has happened, and, you know, and keeps on happening. And I'll show you some things that are like curiosities that might, you know, and that doesn't always make sense, not even to us, but that it sort of entailed when this happened. For instance, like here's the National Health Service, you know, this is the Stockholm region one, has like, you know, all the information about COVID in Yiddish, and throughout this whole time you could, you know, get information about COVID, and like how I'm sure here too, you know, the rules and everything changed, so like, you know, the text had to change too. There were posters in Yiddish that was like, this is how you're supposed to put on the mask, or like, this is the rule now, don't do this, don't, you know. Here's the police. I think this translation is a little bit weird. That's another thing, like sometimes the government will pay for somebody to translate a web page, but, you know, because not so many people looks at it, sometimes the translations might be a little bit kaha. But here you can find, like, you know, information about how to get your passport. There's like ways to get in touch with the police if you want to file a complaint or something. There's from the government itself, like laws being passed are also many of them like translated and written in Yiddish. This one is actually, interestingly enough, the law about national minority languages in Sweden. Here's one about same-sex marriage. You know, there's elections coming up this year, and so you know, all the information about wie sollst du stützen, stimmen, is usually online. Sometimes when there's a vote for European Union, it looks a little bit better. When there's the national elections, it looks a little bit more like this. There's also, but that's just one of the things. Like maybe that's the least of that's the thing that people can sometimes see from outside, but that they maybe didn't really make that much of a difference to speakers of Yiddish and like people that are, you know, bearing or interested in the language itself. But what it did mean was that there's substantial financial support to get for Yiddish projects, for things to happen in society at large with Yiddish. And as I said earlier, I have a background working in education and things like that, and I'm also working now as a librarian. And so I'm really interested in like what it means to you know, help people access education in Yiddish and like access resources in Yiddish. And so what it meant, so the law was passed. Maybe I missed out saying that. The law was passed that recognized the national minorities and the national minority languages. There's a set of different laws underneath that as well that sort of connect. But what it means in reality is that, like, for instance, like all schools need to educate, you know, children about the 5 national minorities and also the 5 national minority languages. Any child at any school that has an interest in learning, you know, my grandpa was a Kalderash, they spoke Romani, Kalderash Romani. I have the right as a child or for my children to have a teacher come and teach my child, how I said my child, to get access to the to education and to learn. And I think that makes a big difference. In the case of Yiddish, we can see that there are many kids right now. There's actually a list of like people waiting. There's a little bit of a lack of teachers. So if anyone's interested in like having a career as a Yiddish teacher, please come. There's many work opportunities with Yiddish in Sweden. I'll get back to you on that a little bit later. But it's enough. What I'm trying to say is that like it's enough that it's one child in one school, may not have like a clear-cut connection, may not speak it themselves, may have parents that don't speak it themselves. I taught kids Aleph Beis that had grandparents that didn't speak Yiddish, but somewhere a little bit beyond that, you know, maybe great-grandparents, there was Yiddish, that was enough. And so it's a very strong, like, and it means things financially as well, right? Because you have to sort of like make sure to supply that teacher, and that's something that the school and the municipality has to figure out. If there's no teachers to be found, they need to do it like online or whatever. But that itself entails several different things, right? Like learning material and things like that. And that gets me a little bit talking about learning materials. It also gets me a little bit into the track of libraries. The library law that we have nationally as well connects to the language laws, which means that like every library in the country, university library or like folks bibliothek, need to